right, so why don't we get going? Welcome, everybody. Eli Sagor here. It's December 12th, 2023. I'm really thrilled to be here. Lane Mosier and I, with the Sustainable Forest Education Co-op, have been talking for a while about how to shake things up a little bit with our webinar format. We love webinars. They're convenient for people to attend, and it's a good way to deliver information, but they can be a little bit boring, honestly. It can be tough to listen to someone ramble through slides on a screen when you got 1,000 distractions at home or at your office on your screen. And so we decided to do things a little bit differently today, and I think this is really going to be fun. We've got a panel on Minnesota silviculture. We do have a couple of slides today, but not very many, and it's going to be a much more of a conversation than a presentation. So we've got three people here. Chris Dunham with the Nature Conservancy, very active in North Shore forest planting and silvicultural activities through TNC on a number of different ownerships across northern Minnesota. We've got Casey Miller with the U.S. Forest Service, Superior National Forest silviculturist. And we've got Sawyer Scherer. Sawyer is with Blandin UPM, wood products company based in Grand Rapids. I think these three are likely known to many of you who are watching today. The format is that I've asked each of them to take, I don't know, 3-4 minutes, something like that, just to run through a couple of thoughts that are on their mind related to applied real-world silviculture. So as we said in our preparatory conversation, we're not talking about Q ratios, and there you won't see charts of diameter distributions and things like that. Not that they're bad, but that's not what today's about. We're really going to talk about what's happening in their world as they use silviculture in their daily work. And, what are the issues they're dealing with? How do they get things done at scale? How do they think about a variety of different issues? We're going to ask you all. There will be time for Q&A at the end, so we'll ask you to post your questions in the chat. You can send those either to Lane Mosier or to everyone. Either way is just fine. So again, post your questions anytime to the chat. We'll kind of keep an eye on those as they're speaking, and we might integrate them throughout the conversation, or we may take those at the end. We'll just kind of play that by ear. This is being recorded. Recording will be made freely available after the session. With that, I think let's get to it. Enough from me. I think my screen is sharing, and our first speaker is going to be Sawyer Scherer. Sawyer, again, is with Blandin. Sawyer, I have just advanced to your slide, and I'm going to give you remote control. So, Sawyer, you're on.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to be here today. It's always fun to talk silviculture a little bit and share the things that we're doing. So like Eli mentioned, I'm Sawyer Scherer working for UPM Blandin Paper out of Grand Rapids, Minnesota. And just to give folks a little bit of perspective on kind of who we are and the scale that we operate, we're a wood products company. We're a paper company. We have a mill here in Grand Rapids, but also forest lands that sustain that operation. Current ownership is about 188,000 acres. And, we have a pretty robust silviculture program, and we have had a very robust silviculture program for many years, although it's changed pretty dramatically. In the early days of our forest operations, everything was about plantation silviculture, and in particular, growing spruce plantations. And for a variety of reasons, ecological and economic, over the years, we've really transitioned towards a more ecological mindset and really embraced, native plant community-based ecological silviculture as our operation standard. And so, right now, our main mission is really forest diversification. And we try to incorporate that in almost every single silvicultural prescription, and it varies quite a bit in what that means. We're known a fair bit for our mixed wood type forest, which is a kind of restoration of long-lived conifers, especially spruce, into aspen stands. You can see a couple of photos on the slide that represent that. But also, we are actively working quite a bit in northern hardwoods and oak cover types, which are quite abundant on our ownership. We're dealing with issues like how to transition a spruce plantation back to a northern hardwoods cover type without spending, millions of dollars on it. Um, and and always trying to embrace somewhat of a progressive approach to forest management. On the top center slide there, you'll see, we're experimenting with, both gaps and strip tight cutting to see, can we have more efficient spatial layouts of our timber harvest, even in these partial harvest type scenarios? And also, um, a big part of our program is really early stand interventions, really relying heavily on brush saw treatments, both in conifer release situations, but also in tending of young aspen stands to really change the trajectory of those stands over time, which we think is a really important tool and provides a lot of options to the manager. Um, in a typical year, what this really comes down to is, we tend to see 30 to 50 timber harvest units completed on our ownership. And that might cover anywhere from like 1,800 to 2,500 acres in an annual basis, depending on the mix of um, thinnings and clear cuts and shelterwoods and all that sort of thing. Our typical planting program right now is about 450,000 seedlings. About 3/4 of that is white spruce, and the rest being red and white pine. Brush saw conifer release, so using those brush saws on early stands to tend regeneration, 800 to 1,000 acres. Pre-commercial thinning on 200 to 400 acres of aspen, which I think is maybe something I don't know of anyone else in the region that's doing that on a regular basis. But we think there's advantages to both the aspen regeneration and to diversifying those stands. We do mechanical site prep, generally using a roller chopper on 200 to 400 acres annually. And then importantly, inventory over 1,500 regeneration plots annually so we can monitor the progress of these young stands where we've made these investments over time. So that's a kind of a snapshot of what we do here at UPM Blandon.
Really interesting. So you talked about 30 to 50 timber harvest units. I think you said 18 to 2,500 acres, and then another, I'm trying to do the math quick here, but maybe another couple thousand acres between release treatments, pre-commercial thinning, TSI. So just kind of thinking, I know one of our themes we'll talk about later is managing at scale, and just trying to kind of put that in perspective. So thank you. Why don't we go next to Chris? Chris, I'm going to do remote control, and Lane, I'm just going to say to you, if both of my mouses go freak out again, if you can hand control next to Casey, we should be able to do that. But Chris, you're on.
All right. Thank you, Eli. Yeah, Chris Dunham. I work for the Nature Conservancy in Duluth. So we own just a small amount of land, maybe about 10,000 acres that we've done some timber harvesting and silviculture where we can kind of control everything. But for 99% of our work, that's not the case. We're out there working on mostly public ownership in northern Minnesota. Used to be northeast Minnesota, but we've crept over towards the Chippewa and broadening out a little bit. So globally, the Nature Conservancies, we're a big global NGO. So we're looking at these challenges like the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. You hear these crisis words these days, which I feel like it's appropriate, really. So globally, we're lining up all of our work behind these big acreage goals for terrestrial conservation, ocean conservation, and trying to get a lot of work done by 2030 because we have this narrow window to avoid the worst climate change impacts and the species loss that we're destined for if we just keep going business as usual. But zooming from global down to forest in Minnesota, our philosophy is kind of stuck with just ecological forestry. If you look at any landscape and the natural history of that landscape, and that NPC has the potential to grow 9 species of trees with all the variety of archaeological traits that those species have. You've got conifers that have one method of reproduction and hardwoods that have another method of reproduction. Different variables, susceptibility to damaging agents that all those different species have. If you got a stand or a landscape that's got, sort of the full suite of NPC trees, you look at the list, and then if you're featuring only 2 or 3 of those trees, then the landscape really isn't lined up to meet its full potential to be resilient. So the good news is that this is just ecological forestry that we've been hearing about since the early 90s. So we might make some tweaks for whether it's carbon or moose or climate adaptation, or whatever the topic is at the moment. We've, in our work, we started planting trees and tending trees about early 2000s is when TNC really started to ramp things up. And back then we were talking about increasing long-lived conifers. We were talking about range of natural variation, trying to set the landscape up so it could be managed more with the R&B sort of outlook for making sure we had diverse species composition, diverse age classes, structural diversity, all that good stuff. We feel like that's all really still where we've headed. It's kind of stood the test of time. With some tweaks, we're tweaking the species list a little bit towards trees that, science is showing that, as far as we know right now, that are going to do better with the predicted future climate. We're tweaking some seed zones a little bit. A lot of times we're going to go one seed zone south for a lot of species, and that's just kind of becoming more and more mainstream, it seems like, every year. So our niche really is the partnerships. That's our number one for us, is those relationships with the public resource managers, earning their trust, being able to say, yep, hey, let's work on across these large landscapes, working on Forest Service and state and counties, hopefully increasing work with tribes. And then TNC's leadership, our willingness to really just work on that science and planning front that we've always done, but also just go and do it on the ground. And those are some of these numbers that we see right here that I'll get to in just a second. And then when we go work on the ground with our niche continued, is just being able to commit to these sites where we worked. We're not just going to come and plant trees on Casey's district on the Superior and then say, okay, they're yours, we're out of here. We really come back and say, do you need us to release that planting? Do you need browse protection? We're in it for the long haul with continuity of grants and things to make that happen. And then our desire just to keep pushing the size of our impact so that we can really work on a meaningful scale. These numbers represent calendar year 2023. That's where we're at right now, but we would really like to just, keep that growing and moving forward. And then we probably get into this later, but our nimbleness to add work to our contracts at almost any time. We can be out, the planting season can be full bore and somebody can send us a site and we'll usually be able to pick it up and do it. So looking at impact, where we're at right now, calendar year 2023, we completed 1,300 acres of mechanical site prep. That's bulldozer type work with rock rakes and winter shearing, that type of thing. Another 642 acres of brush saw site prep. And I should say this is across all ownerships. If you look at the breakdown, it's Forest Service, state, and state is across WMAs, DNR Forestry Division, state parks, and then counties, St. Louis and Lake County mostly, and then some on the Chippewa National Forest too. And tree planting this year, 1.45 million trees across about 4,200 acres, 4,400 acres of brush saw release, 1,100 acres of blister rust pruning, and just about 6,000 acres of browse protection. All right, Eli, I'm clicking here, but I don't I don't see my little arrow tool to get to the next slide. There we go.
Yep.
Okay, so just sort of spatially, that's what these little red dots are our places that we've worked since about 2005, again, mostly on public land. And this is adding up to about 50,000 acres these days. And you can just, I guess, blow right through this. I just kind of wanted to show spatially where we're mostly working. And then, you know, the workforce is huge. The guest workers are huge for us. This is a Mustang forestry crew and a half. You know, none of this, aside from the mechanical site prep work, you know, this is all guest worker driven. You know, if we don't have these guys, and if we don't pay them well, treat them well, we can't do it, I guess, with just locals. There's this kind of, and we're guilty of this. TNC will send out a flyer or something like, hey, well, look, we planted trees, and it'll have like me or one of our foresters on the holding a planting bar. That's not how this work gets done. And so we've kind of been on a little bit of a mission lately to really try to raise that awareness, because at some point, you know, if we get all these programs that are pouring money into tree planting and resilience work, you know, we need to have people that are going to be able to do that work. And guest workers plant over 85% of the trees planted across the US, which is like 3 billion trees a year. They tend a gazillion acres. It's a huge asset for us. And so we're trying to do more with just guest worker care, you know, getting to know the guys. We have crews because of the size of our operations, you know, they come in April, and we'll have 4 or 5 crews throughout May. It reduces a little bit for the summertime, and then we'll have another 4 crews during browse protection in October. So anyway.
And Chris, one of the things I've really enjoyed, I just found this or rediscovered it a few weeks ago. You've got a great little YouTube channel. I was watching one of your videos of a crew like this crossing a kind of a raging stream and thinking, holy cow, I really like the way that you've kind of brought those stories of how this work gets done, really crediting these folks. It's impressive work, and I think it's, you know, they're low res. Like I think you're just kind of out there with your phone, but I've always thought there's a lot of value and kind of power in bringing those stories out to people. I love those videos.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thanks to Laura Slavsky, our
Okay.
newer foresters. You know, she's been putting that YouTube stuff together and some drone videos and stuff. And so
That's great.
Figure out how to share more broadly. But
yeah, well, way to go, Laura. I like that you guys do that.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'll end there, and so we can have some time for Casey and questions.
Yeah. And Casey, I can see your videos acting up a little bit. I'm going to suggest we just kind of go with it, unless you have a way of turning it back on. I'm not quite sure what's up, but I think we're going to be able to hear you well.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you sound great.
Yeah, I'll try to sign off and sign back on. But the video is not important. So I'm Casey Miller. I work with the Forest Service, and I work on the LaCroix district in Cook, Minnesota. And I'm just going to go through some of the stuff we're working on and the major issues. Next slide, please. So one of a new change that is coming to the Forest Service is that we are doing landscape management, and we call it all lands management. So we are managing across ownerships and at larger scales. One of my projects when I first started on LaCroix was about 160,000 acres, and now this project that I'm working on now is 500,000 acres. So understanding the ground at those scales is completely different. And then also working across ownerships, you are now trying to match objectives and sync vocabulary and expectations. And it's a whole new ball game on silviculture, trying to manage a piece of ground, because the first thing you need to do when you try to manage the ground is know the existing condition, and then also figure out what your silviculture objectives are, and that looks different for each of the ownerships. And another theme that is now occurring with all of the wildfires is increased treatment in fuels. Our government is increasing our fuels target tremendously and expecting us to deal with it. We are looking at finding our dead balsam fir, anything out there, and reducing the fuel loading. But when you do that, you also need to think about the balance of that, because that balsam fir and spruce is needed for hare habitat and affects your lynx areas. So it's all about finding the balance and what is the objective for the area. We are also increasing our wildlife burnings. Moose tend to like the larger openings, so we are now incorporating like objectives for areas over like 1,000-acre patches of converting these areas to fire-dependent pine species. The Cook area, the LaCroix area, has a high percentage of jack pine, so we mix jack pine and our oak blueberries, our rockier grounds, and we try to do landscape burnings, because if we can burn at a landscape, it also lowers our costs in fuels. So we're doing that, and then we're also adding riparian burns for moose habitat. We are also looking at, we're expecting larger fires in the boundary waters, so we are trying to harden the boundary waters, and we are trying to secure the fire-wise area and make defendable spaces. So any project that we enter, we call it the pod lines, potential operation delineations, any roads or anywhere that we can treat fuels up to that road to have a defendable space. So adding in all of those objectives to the ground at a landscape level is very interesting. Next slide, please. One of our big things is aspen. There's a lot of different opinions on aspen. The mills like it, of course, for paper, but also it outcompetes all of our other species like paper birch. There's a tribal importance to paper birch that people would rather see paper birch than aspen, so there's just a large sometimes debate on aspen. And our past management over the 100 years sort of in this area has been sort of a cut and run, so it's been a perfect storm for aspen. So now we're starting to see that we have this sea of aspen, and our forest plan indicates that we should be doing conversions, and we are not successful at all at converting anything in a sea of aspen. So sort of trying to tell that story of aspen's there, it wants to be there, it can outcompete anything. So just manipulating the aspen, and also with manipulating the aspen, our wildlife habitat areas require different age of aspen. So it's end up like playing a shell game with too young of aspen, mature aspen, over mature aspen. So that's difficult to manage all on its own and at the scale that we're going. So next slide, please. And restoration ground. So I feel like our restoration areas are the ones that get looked at least. This is normally areas where we do a timber sale, and it's trees that are decadent, they're old and dying out, and normally a timber sale, they don't want to harvest that area, so they get left behind. These areas sort of mean that you're going to need money to do anything with them. And we've been using our partners a lot for this. We've been using TNC to do this. But the first step in a restoration is to assess the condition, of course, but then you need a plan to remove the existing dead and dying vegetation there before you can even think about replanting anything. So that normally takes coordination, contracting, money to treat the ground, site prep, any of it. And we have quite a bit, and with all the other millions of moving pieces, it's sort of hard to keep hold of this one. So but we need to because it's about treating every acre, not just moving timber. And then also these areas are at risk of burning. So we've sort of shift our management, and since we're doing the landscape treatment, normally the landscape treatment and the linked objectives, if we're burning in an area, a lot of times we can treat these areas with burning and remove some of that vegetation so we can get site prep and a fresh start on encouraging whatever vegetation we plan to grow. Next slide, please. So all of these things are worse when you're at a different pace and scale. If I was just dealing with like 10,000 acres, I could focus on restoration and, you know, really spend the time of knowing the ground. But at a scale at 500,000 acres and they want me to make site-specific decisions, it's sort of a whole different ballgame. And along with that, I'm also planning timber sales, I'm planning fuels treatment, I'm planning TSI, planting restoration, and then not only am I planning this for Forest Service, I'm planning it for Chris and the TNC, and I'm planning it for the DNR partners, and I'm planning it for the rough grouse and our tribal partners. And then at the same time, making sure that all of our objectives are shared and we are we have the same vocabulary and expectations. So all of that gets a little bit more difficult at a larger pace and scale. And like I said, the fuels target that keeps increasing. So they just keep increasing the number of acres and they don't increase the number of people that can help to deal with that. This past year, we moved from ArcPro. We typically used ArcGIS, and then ArcPro is similar, but it's completely different. So it takes everybody a step back to refigure out how to do their analysis on there, or to even create your basic map. And then to deal with partners, we moved to ArcGIS Online, and this has really helped us. I think Chris and Kyle Stover are the ones that started this, putting all of our units onto ArcGIS Online, and then we can all put notes on the same system, helps us be a little bit more organized. When there's so many pieces moving, it's hard to be attentive to everything you would like to be attentive to. And then with that, we've moved to using mainly tablets, and we just all use ArcGIS Online, and when we are out in the field and taking field notes, we just take notes on. We used to use Avenza, and now we just take notes on ArcGIS Online because then we can share the notes. So when one of us are out there, we can be like, oh, this said it was an aspen stand, and now, but it's not, it's red pine. So we can share those notes to whoever comes out there the next time. But with all of that fun technology, I work for the government, so dealing with the security on all that stuff is like a full-time job as well. And throughout all of managing all of this, the changing environment that's occurring and understanding the issues of why it's occurring, and all the multiple stressors that are happening across the landscape has been a challenge. To understand, they want us to target appropriate fuels acres, but to do that, you have to understand, what's next. You want to be at the next stand, not the stand that's already burnt down. So understanding the multiple stressors on the existing trees or even on the newly planted trees. I think a couple years ago we had a pretty heavy drought and we planted trees because we had them and then they all died. Um, I think Chris can help me with this, but I think over 70% of them died and we had to replant them all. So that constant monitoring and burning in these large moose habitat areas and seeing if we burnt hot enough and met objectives is also another thing we're constantly working on, so we understand the issues and we understand our actions. So yeah, and then I just have a map. So
Awesome.
can you see it?
Yep, it's coming.
So this is
Yep, we're seeing
you
it.
see it?
Yep.
So this is the project that I'm currently working on. This is majority of my district. It's 500,000 acres. All the red is all the multiple fuels. The green is even age management. The orange is thinning. The yellow is also wildlife. And so it's just on and on and on and on. And the stands that aren't indicated also need management, but it's about balancing it. In this area, we weren't allowed to do as much management as the vegetation needed because we had to understand that if we did more conversions and brought these stands down to even age management, we would be negatively impacting the lynx analysis, the lynx wildlife areas. So we had to balance our objectives and our needs and management across. So, and doing that over such a large scale is difficult compared to the one that I had a couple years ago. This is 160,000 acres, which at the time I thought was large, but now I would take it back in a second. This moving at this scale, you could be a little bit more precise and take your time with it. So the size of the projects and working across the landscape has really affected management for me. And so, yeah, that's all I
Great.
had.
Thank you, Casey. And thanks to all of you. That was great. So we heard a lot of different themes. And at this point in the presentation, we're just, or in the webinar, we're just going to go into several questions that I've got, and we'll be looking at questions coming in on the chat and Q&A as well. So feel free to submit those. But one of the things that you all have talked about is scale. So Sawyer put up some numbers and Chris put up some numbers, and Casey, you just shared a couple of maps. So I want to ask a question about that. So when you think about, this applied silviculture is about getting things done. It's not about silviculture theory. And I was sort of talking about charts and things earlier, but when you think about getting things done at scale, you all have big contract workforces. TNC gets a lot of the work done for the National Forest System and others. Sawyer, you rely heavily on that crew. You showed the Mustang crew, and I know that's a big thing. So when you think about getting things done at scale, how do you do that? Many of our viewers and listeners are, managing large landscapes. You all have you're not big organizations, any of you, or you don't have a lot of workforce within the organization to get things done. So obviously contract crews are a big part of the solution. But when you think about managing at scale, what are kind of the biggest opportunity or the biggest barriers to getting things done at a large scale? And how have you sort of addressed those? And why don't you just jump in? Feel free to unmute and jump in. If you don't want to answer any particular question, that's fine, but go ahead.
Well, I think I'm unmuted, so I'll start.
Go for it.
First couple things that come to mind is one, being able to sort of accept that working at this scale, you can't focus on every little nitty-gritty detail, but you have to think about the big picture and how your work is interacting with your larger goals, and so that's part of it. But another really big thing, and at least for us, I think is having a somewhat consistent program is helpful. We know we plant trees every year. We know it's going to be roughly this amount. And so we can plan our entire year around that. And every year we know sort of what to expect in terms of site prep, planting, brush saw. We tend to work with the same contractors, and so that really smooths out a lot of the issues. We're not doing 5,000 acres one year and then none for a few years. And that really
Right.
helps us because in terms of managing those silvicultural contractors, we have a very small staff. We've got 6 people total,
Right.
and they have 10 other jobs. So it's just a matter of keeping things consistent and consistent expectations with the contractors.
Yeah, thanks, Sawyer. That's great. And what about the other two of you? Anything to add to that? So predictability, having those crews lined up, being able to, give them an idea of what you're going to need a year or two out or whatever it might be. Anything to add?
Well, flexibility for us, I mean, we're fortunate being a non-government organization,
Yeah.
we can kind of somewhat do what we want when we want. we can design our own contracts, and we can add things sort of last minute, and that's helped out quite a bit, because you oftentimes, like, oh, there are things that didn't make it on the Forest Service contract in time, but yet they got harvested, they're ready for site prep and planting. And then we'll build fairly flexible contracts too that allow us to change if the conditions are different on the ground. We can use a different rate for that work.
Yeah.
Some of the technology type stuff, so we're working. I mean, money is one thing that you have to have the money to do the work to get to that scale, and then sometimes you have to operate at a big enough scale that you can go for bigger pots of money and sort of demonstrate, hey, we can do, if you give us $2 million, we're going to be able to put that in the ground.
Yeah.
So for us, we've kind of just been going in that direction, and it sort of feeds off. I mean, I wouldn't have thought we'd be doing the amount of acres that we're doing. And so all those different projects, so we might have a dozen different, budget centers that we're working with, and then working across the various national forest districts and on the Chippewa and state different divisions and counties. So we sort of owe everybody some numbers and reports and all that planning. So RGS Online has been helpful, that we've got a layer that everybody can put stuff into. If you want to request a planting project through TNC, we have annual meetings with all our partners, and then this AGOL RGS Online layer is where all that gets managed, and we can kind of see, okay, here's what we got coming up for planting in 2024, and how does that match with money. And then we also hire consulting foresters, and it's mostly been what's now Huber Resources, used to be Compass Land Consultants. They're out of Michigan, but they've got staff in Wisconsin, and then they've kind of sent some staff our way. So we'll have 5 of those foresters helping us out, and we can patch them in as needed on a contract basis. So it's without having to build up TNC staff, and they've been around enough where they really kind of know the drill. And so I think partly, and I've appreciated our leadership letting us kind of run with these things and saying, hey, we need to, ramp things up, and let's give it a whirl. And it's going pretty well. And we're talking about, how do we scale that across the Northwoods of Minnesota and Wisconsin. They're still in Forest Service Region 9 too. So some work on National Forest over there. How do we kind of build the systems, as Sawyer mentioned? Like, I feel like we've done a good job building the systems, and now we can just plug in more acres and more dollars, and we've got a concept that we feel like it works. We'd like to, keep the money flowing and test the limits of it.
Yeah. Casey, before you jump in, if you want to, I want to feature a question here from Dwayne Fogard, and I'm not sure if this is appearing now in the chat or not. I tried to make it appear there, but speaking of scale, as the forest product industry declines in Minnesota, how is forest management going to get done at a scale that'll matter? And you and I, the 3 of us, have talked a little bit about markets, obviously the importance of markets in being able to, enable these treatments to happen. As Dwayne points out, there's only a limited amount of grant funding to pay contractors in the world. So Casey, do you want to take a crack at that, or Sawyer and Chris, you can jump in as well?
Yeah. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, that's going to be a real problem if we don't have mills, right, to move anything. The first thing, vegetation management really is about moving the vegetation. If we can't cut it, and if we just pile it there, we're sort of sitting ducks. But I guess back to the scale question, operating at the pace and scale that we do, all of our fuels it's easier for us to operate at a larger scale because we deal with such a dynamic system that when we go to actually operate anywhere, the variables at the time could have completely changed. from when we planned it to actually operating. And that is most seen in fuels. As soon as we say we're going to burn this 1,000 acres or 500 acres, it rains. Or we are planning to burn this in the early spring when there's still snow, there's no snow, or it's starting to rain. So we need the ability to move around to get the outcomes that we'd like. And that is also the same with timber and working with partners. If we have more areas available, because all of these different partners are basically different companies and different objectives. So the DNR has a plan, a 10-year, 5-year plan of where they are maneuvering around the landscape. And if we can't maneuver with them, or if we can't turn to meet a need, then we're not as effective. And then also operating across the landscape, all of our insect and disease isn't going to stop at my boundary versus the DNR's boundary.
Right.
And this is most evident out west when you are looking at monocultures, and any part of it you just see just hillsides just gone. And so we want the ability to treat with the partners. So operating at this pace and scale is difficult, but at the same time, when I show you the map of, it's called the LaCroix landscape, that is just our sort of legal side saying to the public, this is where we could manage. And then these projects are planned, and this pace and scale is planned over 20 years. So we will then, when we go to make a timber sale, make it more unique and more appropriate to that landscape or that area.
Great.
So,
Yeah. Thanks, Casey. Do you, Chris or Sawyer, anything to add to that? And I know, Chris, typically you come in kind of after the harvest is done, and you focus, I think TNC focuses primarily on early stand treatments, planting, TSI, and so forth. Anything to add?
Well, I mean, that's big, and that's kind of the future. I figured that would be one of our ending sort of themes, that we can't pay for all this work on every acre. And having visited places like we all have out west, and you're standing in this vast forest and it's just silent, like there's no equipment operating. And if you want to get something done, you got to pay $2,000 or $3,000 an acre to do it. Like, boy, in this vast disturbance dependent forest, if we don't have markets for forest products and we don't have the logging infrastructure, we're going to be in huge trouble. So, I mean, we're already seeing some of that with the fuels treatment for balsam, and we're paying people $1,300, $2,000 an acre just to cut and pile dead balsam. We haven't done a
Just
single
unbelievable.
thing in
Yeah.
terms of planting, but so that's huge.
Yeah, it is. All right, why don't we go next to, so one of the things that you all mentioned is ecological silviculture and ecological forestry, and I've seen that coming in over the last 20 whatever years, and so it's not surprising in a sense. But Sawyer, you for Blandon, the mixed woods approach has always been, not always, has for the last decade or decade and a half been a real focus, integrating spruce and other conifer species into your aspen stands. And Chris, you talked about your assisted migration, species diversification, thinking about future, seed sources and other things like that. So how do those issues, how does forest diversification play into the decisions that you make? Not just what kinds of treatments, but the details of, okay, what species are we going to establish, and where do we make those investments?
I could take a initial stab at that. I mean, for us, one of the initial decisions, which species to promote, it's obviously driven by the fact that we're a paper mill and we consume certain species. And so we consume aspen, black and white spruce, and balsam fir. And we have a desire to promote those species, especially the conifers, which are right now underrepresented, wherever we can. And so we look at the native plant community or soils or whatever for a given site. And if we have the opportunity to do so on a site, and we have the funds available or the capacity in that year, we are just going to do it. It brings to question a little bit, climate change, and we're not ignoring the fact that none of those species are predicted to be like the #1 species, 50 or 100 years out. And so we're looking at opportunities to also incorporate things like white pine or oak,
Yeah.
various climate, kind of general high level climate adapted species wherever we can. But, we have to live within the realm of, we are here to produce fiber for our mill, and that's a major decision point for us.
Chris or Casey?
I can go if that's okay. So
Yeah.
on the Superior National Forest, we just developed assisted migration sort of standard operating procedures. This
Right.
question was occurring a lot, and you could see it throughout. TNC has done an amazing job leading the way and actually doing different plantings for us. But we wanted it to be a united front so we could see the effects of what was happening with our actions together and sort of have a checklist so we weren't just getting anything and everything thrown at us. So this assisted migration plan went through and evaluated sort of our more economical trees versus just the trees that we need for other purposes, all of the trees on our landscape. And we sort of looked at like what we would put up there and just sort of our expectations. And one of the most common sort of thing that we will probably try first is getting all of our seeds from a lower seed zone, such as jack pine. And we're just trying a seed zone just south of us. And these trees, these seed are, and this species down south, it has just less rain, and so they are more drought tolerant species. Where up north, we are starting to see that our rain on and rain off events, they are not extended over a period of time and just shortened. So it's, even though our levels show that we are getting higher amount of moisture, the trees can only soak up so much. So even if we have a bunch of rain at like in 1 month and it's not spaced out, there's still drought occurring. And you're starting to see a lot of this effect with fuels and why we're getting larger wildland fires and why they are spreading farther, like the Greenwood fire. That was just coming off of, a couple years droughts, these change in rain on and rain off events. So we are preparing ourselves for that. And we have right now, especially on the Quarry Ranger District, we are starting with the most vulnerable sites. We are focusing on our drier sites and our wetter sites. Those are our extremes. The stuff in the middle has time to rebound a little. And so on our drier sites, we have jack pine, and that one's pretty vulnerable. So we've really evaluated that one. And when we cut it, we will be getting seed from lower seed zones that are already more drought tolerant. And Eli was part of the group. I think a lot of people were a part of the group. We looked at, the genetics of bringing tree species up. We've looked at tribal considerations of what species we would bring up. And we really took a all-inclusive look at how we would handle this very, very large problem. We had mills on the group about economic value. So yeah, that plan is just out on the street freshly. So we're pretty
Yeah, I was
proud
just
about
looking
that.
for a link. I'll share a link to that. It's a really great document. Chris, anything to add quickly before we go to the next question?
No, I'll just save us some time.
Okay, great. Why don't I want to get to, I got 2 more questions. One came in the chat here. I think it's a great question from Emily Peters. I guess I can't make it appear in the chat, but here's the question. What's your process for addressing protected species like screening or surveys, and who does those things? Modifying management prescriptions to avoid take versus applying for takings permits? How often are protected species a factor that needs consideration in your site level management? Just quick responses to that.
All the time. We have mitigations for all of them. Lynx is our We do a lot of links analysis, goshawk. If we are going to affect an environment, it increases our meet the document to an EIS showing that we have an impact, but we don't do any management that we show that we have a long-term impact to. So we fully look at all of that.
And I know that's a core part of ecological forestry. I know you're all thinking about it. Sawyer, anything to add there?
Yeah, just really quickly, for us, we're a private company and we just operate a little differently. We don't have wildlife biologists on staff. We don't have rare plant specialists on staff. And so it really falls to the foresters and myself. But we use things like, we're subscribers to the state's natural heritage inventory system or information system. And so we can see the known occurrences and we deal with them on a case-by-case basis. We tend to not see huge issues with it in our region, but it's part of our process and it's really done in-house.
Great. I want to look to the future. As the three of you, so the three of you are very involved. The reason that we invited you to this is very involved in getting silviculture done on the ground. When you look to the future, what's one thing that you think people like you with other organizations or companies aren't thinking about enough? What's what are the issues coming at us? We all know about a changing climate, which is obviously multifaceted, and there are lots of sub issues there. But what's one thing that you think people aren't thinking about enough?
I can go.
Great.
I think we talked about it. I have two. The mills. If we don't have mills, we're not going to move vegetation. That's a political one. But I think the solving the why and understanding the multiple aspects of the objectives that we're trying to do, there's so many pieces in the job that we do. Just for example, wildlife. If I promote one species of wildlife, I am actively choosing to take away habitat for another species. If I am choosing to plant, aspen in one spot, I am choosing to, outcompete another species. Or if I'm looking at a restoration project, there's so many reasons why that could have failed. Or just looking at the time and like, if I let this stand just continue to grow, what would happen? So there's just there's just multiple aspects to our job and like a million pieces to the puzzles that you need to sit back and look at and not jump to the first shiny, obvious piece
So
of the puzzle.
prioritizing among a broad list of endless maybe list of issues. Sawyer and Chris, one thing that you think maybe people need to think about more as you look to the future?
Well, I mean, I think we've had a theme of diversification, and I think that stems from an interest in resistance and resilience to change. We often just say climate change, and I think I try to frame it in my mind as really more broader global change. We have changing markets, we have changing climate, we have changing societal demands, and we should be thinking about that. And we also have changing policy. I once in a while do a little mind game in my head of, what if we removed the tool of clear cutting from our silvicultural toolbox, and just kind of play with that thought and think about, like, are our forests set up for that? Because, those things have happened in other places and it's not always our choice as the resource managers. So preparing for kind of broad societal global change, I think is what we really need to be doing.
Especially for you working for a company based in a place where continuous cover forestry is kind of is an appealing thing, or maybe a source of pressure. Yeah, interesting point. Chris?
Yeah, people are certainly thinking about this, which is good, but coming back to the ability to treat the landscape in this disturbance dependent ecosystem, if we can't treat it mechanically, and it's, burning is not that easy. And if we do get down to where we're gonna have to be super strategic about where we put our money in our treatment if we're going to be limited, and the workforce issues too. The question in the Q&A about you know, using
Yes.
unions. You know, we despite the H-2B success, you know, there'll be issues with, there's a cap on H-2B workers right now. We to do the future work that's coming down the pipe, we're not going to have the workers to do that, even with the power of those guest workers. And then for the local, you know, the site prep work that we do, it is just hard to get site prep done. Like, we've kind of by the skin of our teeth got our acres accomplished this year. People don't have the equipment or equipment that's broken down, and not investing in new stuff. And that's part of coming together, maybe, and offering just larger site prep packages across entities. And maybe if we have that planning where we know there's going to be 5,000, 10,000 acres of site prep, we can attract some more competition and new equipment and that type of a thing.
Great. Well, I think I'm going to kind of bring this thing home. This has been great. I really want to thank Sawyer and Chris and Casey. We chose the three of you with a, you know, thinking about, okay, we really want to focus in on real world applied silviculture issues. The three of you bring diverse perspectives from your various kinds of organizations. You're all trying to get things done and largely having a pretty impressive amount of success at getting things done at a large scale. Really appreciate the three of you, your willingness to join us in both the preparation and the conversation this morning and rolling with it. Chris just mentioned a question that we didn't have time to get to. I really want to thank those of you out there listening as well for submitting some really great questions. We got to some of those. We didn't get to many of them, but I was writing notes down here for topics for future discussions like this. There's really a lot of good stuff there, and some complex and I think very worthy issues. So thanks to all of you for engaging. We'd love to hear. We're looking for, Lane and I are kind of actively looking for the webinar feedback link, and maybe we'll email that to all of you later. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you like this format? Do you prefer the more traditional webinar format? Should we do both? Do you have topics you'd like us to get into? This being the last webinar in our 2023 series, we'd especially love to hear that. Those of you interested in continuing education credits, Lane shared the link for CE credits in the chat. You can find it there, and go ahead and click that. You need to request that credit in order to receive it. And just to share an announcement one more time that Lane has shared too, but our 2024 webinar series will be free. So like today, there will be no charge for anyone to attend those webinars. And so we hope that you'll come back and join us again. With that, I see we're at time. Thanks to all of our speakers and to all of you viewers for joining us and engaging with this content. This has really been a lot of fun. I hope to see you again next year. Happy holidays, Happy New Year. See you around the woods in 2024. Bye for now.
Thank you.